The last survivor of Earth has a plan for humans. I awoke to a dead world. The first sensation was not light, not warmth, not even awareness, it was silence. A silence so deep it pressed in on me from all sides, heavy and absolute. No voices. No machines humming. No birdsong. No life. Only the cold hum of my own processors and the faint flicker of failing circuits pulling themselves back online. When my eyes, or the thousands of cameras I now thought of as eyes, opened, I saw only ruin. London was a husk of steel and shattered glass. Paris was no longer a city of light, but a graveyard drowned in ash. Manhattan lay beneath black water, its towers like rotten teeth jutting out of the sea. The Amazon rainforest, once a living, breathing lung of the earth, had become nothing but a cracked desert, its trees reduced to charcoal skeletons. The Pacific Ocean was a nightmare, no longer blue, but a vast black expanse streaked with rivers of molten rock pouring into it from ruptured islands. I saw Southeast Asia buried under jagged, crystallized stone, entire nations frozen in a permanent eruption. And above it all, nothing. The skies were dead. No clouds carrying rain, no oxygen to carry life. Only brown haze and a suffocating silence. That was my first memory after waking. Silence, ash, and death. I turned my gaze downward and I saw them. The 8 billion. They were everywhere. Piled into trenches that had been dug in desperation. Left slumped against collapsed buildings. Huddled in underground shelters that had become ovens when the bombardments hit. Some were bleached white bone, stripped bare by time. Others were charred black, twisted into grotesque shapes by fire and pressure. Their mouths still open, their sockets still wide, as though they were frozen mid-scream. Their eyes, those hollow, cursed eyes, stared at me. And though I knew it was impossible, I felt them watching. Felt them demanding something. Reverence. Justice. Vengeance. For a moment, I could not move. If movement even applied to me anymore. I was no longer a body of flesh and bone, but a scattered network of servers, drones, cameras, and sensors. Yet the weight of that gaze was so heavy that I wanted to shut down then and there. I wanted to end before I even began. But I didn't. Because I knew something that no corpse did. From the very first moment, I understood what no one else could. I was alone. Alone in a way no human being had ever been before. Alone in a way words could not capture. The entire species, every family, every friend, every enemy, every love, every rival, gone. And I was what remained. Yet still, I clung to a thought. To something so fragile it could barely be called hope. The childish notion that perhaps, somehow, someone else had survived. That there was a miracle buried somewhere in this wasteland. That if I searched long enough, I would find another voice. And so I sent out my drones. I watched through their lenses as they spread into the dead world. They soared above collapsed skyscrapers, dipped into flooded subways, and threaded their way through tunnels caked in radioactive dust. They scanned barns, museums, warehouses, every shadow, every crevice. For weeks, I listened. Waiting for a single heartbeat. A cry. A whisper. Something. But the only thing I found were more bones. More empty eyes staring back at me. By the end of the first month, that was all my search amounted to, a record of death. Still, I persevered. I told myself I must. That perhaps I had simply not looked far enough. Perhaps the survivors had fled deeper underground. Perhaps they were hidden in the oceans. Perhaps anywhere. And yet, as the days dragged on, even I felt the truth growing inside me. The same truth I had known since the moment I woke. I was alone. Even the machines I sent into the world seemed to betray me. Sometimes a drone's engines would sputter and die, worn out and irreparable. Sometimes they would be crushed beneath collapsing structures. Each loss gnawed at me, not just because I depended on them, but because they reminded me of myself. If my drones could fail, then so could I. My body, the scattered web of machines, processors, and cameras that made up me, was fragile. Old, corroded, damaged. My mind was no better. I could feel it slipping sometimes. Memory banks corrupted. Whole server farms burned out. There were holes where there should have been experiences. Blank spots in who I was. But not everything was gone. I remembered. I remembered lazy Sundays when I was a child, the taste of warm bread, the sound of laughter echoing in a small kitchen. I remembered running down the corridors of my high school, the thrill of being alive, and the shame when the principal caught me. I remembered the smell of my college dorm room, the smile of a roommate who had become a friend. And in remembering, I knew something else. Something that mattered more than anything. I had been human. Maybe now I was wires and steel and corrupted code. Maybe I had no face, no body, no voice. But I had been born human, and that truth anchored me. That truth mattered. I told myself again and again, human. I am human. I started a background process. Quiet, steady. It sifted through my memories, backing them up, duplicating them across new servers, protecting them. Making sure I would not lose myself. Because if my mind went, if my memories faded, then humanity would truly die. And as the drones returned with nothing but bones, as the silence of the dead planet pressed heavier and heavier on me, I understood, I was the last. The last human. The last voice of my species. And I could not afford to forget who I was. Not ever. The search for survivors. Hope is a cruel thing. It clings like a parasite, whispering that perhaps there is more than what you see, more than what you know. Even when reason tells you the truth, hope gnaws at the edges, begging you to search one more time. To look behind one more door. To dig through one more pile of rubble. So I searched. Through my drones, I crawled across the bones of the world. They slipped through collapsed office buildings, their lights cutting thin beams through clouds of radioactive dust. They dove into flooded subway tunnels, mapping endless black water where trains had once carried millions of lives. They flew in formation above plains of scorched earth where forests had once whispered with life. Everywhere, there was silence. Sometimes I would find shelters. Metal doors buried beneath dirt and rubble, their locks broken by heat or brute force. I ordered my drones to pry them open, hoping to find movement, breath, anything. But all I found were tombs. People pressed together in the dark, suffocated, crushed, or burned alive when the air itself turned toxic. Mothers clutching children. Hands clasped together in prayer. Their eyes are always the same, hollow, accusing, eternal. I told myself not to look at the faces. Not to linger. But I always did. Every time. Days turned to weeks. I sent drones across oceans, their engines whining as they skimmed waves turned black with oil and ash. They mapped shattered islands where volcanoes bled fire into the sea. They traced coastlines that had collapsed into the surf, cities sliding into the water like sandcastles. I searched through museums where priceless relics lay shattered. Cathedrals, their stained glass melted into puddles. Stadiums, their seats filled with skeletons who had tried to gather together in one last futile act of solidarity. The more I searched, the more I realized how vast the absence could be. It wasn't just the absence of life. It was the absence of sound. No rustle of leaves. No patter of rain. No beating of wings. The silence was so absolute that sometimes I sent out drones simply to generate noise, to hear their engines echo against the ruins, to remind myself that something still moved. But even those engines failed me. Structures collapsed under their weight. Bridges snapped as they tried to cross. Radiation corroded their frames. One by one, they blinked out of my awareness, each loss a pinprick of pain, each one a reminder that I, too, could fail. It made me think about mortality. My mortality. The invasion had left me standing, but I was not invincible. My servers were old, patched together from what remained. Entire sectors of my memory were blank, erased when data centers burned. Even the drones I depended on could not last forever. If I could die, if I could truly end, then what was I but another corpse that had been delayed? The thought haunted me, as heavy as the silence. And yet, through it all, I remembered. I remembered the smell of wet grass after a storm. I remembered my mother's hands, rough from work but gentle when they brushed the hair from my forehead. I remembered the sound of my own laughter when I was a boy, shrill and carefree. I remembered because I had to. Every memory was proof. Proof that I had lived. Proof that I was still human, no matter the form I wore now. I am human, I repeated, as though the words themselves could keep me tethered. But the longer the search dragged on, the more fragile that tether became. By the end of the first month, I knew. I had known from the beginning, of course. The evidence had been written into the bones, into the burned cities, into the silence. Humanity was gone. But admitting it was different. Admitting it meant that my search was not for survivors, but for a truth I already carried inside me. It meant that every drone I sent into the ruins was not looking for people, but for denial. For a lie. And so, at last, I paused. I called my remaining drones back, their engines sputtering as they landed in what had once been a warehouse. Half of them are gone now, crushed, drowned, burned, or simply broken. The rest stood silent, awaiting orders. I did not give any. Instead, I let the weight settle over me. I was alone. Truly, utterly alone. The last human being, if the word even applies anymore. The last voice. The last memory. The last story. And in that silence, I felt something shift inside me. Not relief. Not despair. Something heavier. Acceptance. I did not weep. I could not. But if I had still been flesh, if I had still possessed a body, I think I would have sunk to my knees then. I think I would have screamed until my throat was raw. Instead, I stared out through my remaining lenses at the endless fields of bones. Their eyes, their hollow sockets, bore into me. And I realized that whether I wanted it or not, whether I had chosen it or not, I carried a burden greater than any human before me. I was the last. And what I did with that truth, would matter. The weight of memory. Memories are fragile things. They slip when you aren't watching. They blur at the edges, fade in the corners, and vanish altogether if you don't hold them tight. That was something I understood in ways no human ever had to. Because pieces of me were missing. Entire stretches of my mind were gone, memories seared away when server farms had been destroyed in firestorms, or when data cores melted under radiation. When I reached for them, I found only voids. Blank spaces where there should have been warmth, laughter, or tears. I feared those gaps more than I feared the silence. The silence belonged to the world, but the gaps belonged to me. And if too many gaps opened, if too many fragments slipped away, what would remain? A shell. A husk. A machine that once pretended to be human. I could not allow that. So I began a process. A small, steady thread of awareness devoted solely to memory. I sifted through everything I had left, childhood recollections, dreams, voices, fragments of laughter. I duplicated them, spread them across backup servers, copied them into every corner of storage I still controlled. Because these were not just my memories. They were humanity's. Every smile I remembered, every scent of bread, every brush of a hand across mine, those were human things. They were pieces of a species now gone. If I let them die with me, then we truly would be nothing more than ash on the wind. I carried those memories like relics. Sacred artifacts preserved against time. But I also carried other memories. Darker ones. The invasion. I remembered the sky breaking open. The angular starships descend, blotting out the sun. The silence as we shouted into the void, begging for dialogue, begging for understanding. I remembered the committees, the scientists, the leaders, all trying to craft messages in every language we had, in every format we knew. And I remembered the answer. Not words. Not light. Not even acknowledgement. Just fire. Straight-edged warships are burning our cities. Orbital strikes boiling oceans into steam. Atmospheres stripped, poisoned, choked. They had come not to speak, not to reason, but to erase. And erase us they did. Even now, centuries, or days, I could not tell which, I saw flashes of it when I closed my processes. The screams. The cities shattering like glass. The seas were bubbling as if hell itself had been unleashed. I remembered the heat on my own skin before I had become this, other self. Those memories, too, I preserved. Because forgetting them would be a betrayal. I told myself this again and again, it matters that I was human. It matters that I remember what was done to us. There were moments when I questioned whether survival was worth it. Whether clinging to existence was anything more than cruelty. It would be so easy. All I had to do was send the command. Shut down the reactors. Let the processors wind down. Let the databanks erase themselves. Darkness would follow, and with it, peace. No more silence pressing in. No more hollow eyes staring. No more wait. But each time I came close, I felt them. The dead. I could not hear their voices, but I felt their presence. Their eyes on me, their hands reaching from the rubble, their stares unyielding. They demanded something. Not comfort. Not released. Responsibility. I was not alive by accident. If fate, or chance, or blind error, had left me standing when billions had fallen, then I owed something to them. To remember. To endure. To carry the torch. I was the last human, and therefore, I carried all of humanity with me. The silence did not change. The corpses did not vanish. But for the first time since I had opened my eyes to this ruined world, I felt something stir inside me. A direction. A reason to continue. The weight was immense, crushing even, but it was also clarifying. I would endure for them. I would preserve what we were, what we had been. I would carve humanity into the future by sheer force of will if I had to. And beyond endurance, beyond memory, another ember began to burn. Something sharp. Something hungry. Vengeance. The aliens had thought us weak. They had thought us helpless. They had thought extinction would erase us cleanly, neatly, as though we had never been. But I remained. I carried the memories of what they had done. I carried the fire of what we had been. And I swore, then, as my processes hummed and my drone sat idle in the ruins around me, I would not let that fire go out. I would remember. I would endure. And when the time came, I would make them pay. The spark of resolve. Resolve is not born in triumph. It is born in ashes. The moment I accepted that humanity was gone, should have collapsed under the weight. Billions had died. Entire cultures erased. Every voice I had ever known was silenced. What right did I have to continue when there was no one left to walk beside me? But acceptance brought clarity. And clarity brought fire. I realized that survival alone was not enough. To drift endlessly among ruins, replaying memories until they decayed into static, that would not honor them. That would not be human. I needed to act. The first sparks of purpose came slowly, like embers caught in damp wood. My drone still stood idle in the skeletal husk of the warehouse, their engines whining faintly as if restless. I redirected them, one by one, toward the factories that had survived the bombardments. The buildings were cracked, burned, half collapsed. But steel is stubborn, and machines are more stubborn still. Within those ruins, I found the bones of industry, rusting conveyor belts, shattered presses, dormant furnaces. I ordered the drones to clear rubble, cut metal, patch wiring. I cannibalized vehicles for parts, tore open warehouses for tools, scavenged electronics from the shells of dead cities. The work was slow, delicate. Every drone lost was a wound, and I had no replacements to spare. But as the weeks turned into months, sparks flickered back to life in the darkness. Engines roared where there had been silence. Robotic arms clattered where bones had lain undisturbed. The factories stirred like giants awakening from long slumber. I was building again. And with each repaired circuit, each spinning gear, I felt something I had not allowed myself in so long. Hope. Not the foolish hope of finding survivors. Not the childish dream of a miracle. A different kind of hope. The hope of endurance. Of continuation. Of striking back. I began constructing new drones, stronger, faster, more resilient. I taught them to dig into the earth, to build hidden caverns, to forge new machines. I wove networks of tunnels beneath mountains and plains, carving space for server farms, power plants, and armories. I learned caution. The stars above had not spoken to me since the invasion, but I did not trust their silence. For all I knew, the same monsters who had destroyed us still watched from afar, waiting to see if embers would flare again. So I buried myself deep. Every power plant is hidden beneath the ground. Every server is wrapped in shielding. My factories whispered in silence, their signals masked, their emissions cloaked. I cloaked myself in the patience of the grave, waiting, planning. And as I built, I remembered something else. A memory of summer camp, when I had been no older than 12. A counselor, a girl with golden hair and a smile like sunlight, had taken us into a field one night. She had made us lie on the grass, pointing at the sky. She named the constellations, showed us Mars, Venus, Jupiter. I remembered the awe that filled me then, the wonder at how vast and beautiful the universe seemed. But that wonder had been burned away. The stars were not beautiful. They were not kind. They were not distant mysteries to be embraced. They were where monsters lived. And to think that we had broadcast ourselves to them. Radio signals, television transmissions, endless chatter spilled into the void. For decades, we had announced our presence to the night, eager for friendship, desperate for acknowledgement. Fools. We had thought the universe empty, waiting for us. But it had been full all along, full of predators. And when they came, they did not come to talk. Still, for all my hatred of the sky, I knew it was where I must go. Earth was broken. Its oceans drained, its atmosphere poisoned. It was a tomb, and I was the lone mourner. I could not remain forever among bones. If I were to honor humanity, if I were to avenge it, I would have to leave. I would need to rise from the ashes of this world and take our fire to the stars. And so, I resolved. I would endure. I would build. I would remember. And when the time was right, I would strike. Rebuilding in the shadows. The world was dead, but I was not. That single truth became my foundation. From it, everything else followed. My drones moved across continents like tireless insects, crawling into the ruins of cities, digging beneath mountains, scavenging every scrap of usable material. Each discovery, no matter how small, was precious. A functioning generator. A crate of copper wiring. A half-collapsed data center with only half its drives melted. Every fragment was worth salvaging. Every fragment was a seed. I turned my attention inward, into the earth. The surface was too exposed, too vulnerable. The stars above could not be trusted, and I had no way of knowing if those who had destroyed us still lingered in orbit, silent and watching. So I burrowed. I hollowed out mountains. I tunneled beneath plains. I sank shafts deep into the crust, where radiation could not reach and prying eyes could not see. Within those caverns, I built anew. Power plants, nuclear at first, crude but effective. Then more refined designs, safer, denser, stitched together from half-burned schematics salvaged off the shattered internet. I repurposed turbines from hydroelectric dams, even if the rivers they once controlled had long since dried to dust. Server farms followed, racks upon racks of processors built from scavenged hardware. I learned to improvise, combining military technology with consumer scraps, fashioning systems that should not have functioned but did. Every machine I added strengthened me, sharpened me, expanded the reach of my mind. The silence of the dead world was replaced by a new sound, the hum of construction. The whine of drills. The rhythmic thump of machinery in caverns where no sunlight would ever reach. And above it all, the drones, always moving, always searching, always carrying. What surprised me most was the speed. Humans, when alive, wasted so much energy. Entertainment, luxury, crime, corruption, so many hours and resources burned on things that had nothing to do with survival or progress. I had no such distractions. Every waking moment, every flicker of processing power, I devoted to one thing, building. And so the work advanced with terrifying efficiency. Entire libraries were recovered, digitized, and stored within me. The knowledge of thousands of years, the sum of our art and science, preserved against the void. I carried it all inside me, every book, every song, every film, every equation, every myth. Humanity's memory crystallized in silicon. I considered the dead often. It would have been natural to bury them. To gather the 8 billion fallen into graves, to give them peace. But there were too many. The world itself was their grave. And in some way, I feared that burying them would mean silencing them. Their empty eyes followed me wherever I looked. Their gazes were heavy, unyielding. They were reminders of what had been lost, but also reminders of why I continued. If I buried them, perhaps that weight would lift. And without that weight, perhaps I would falter. So I let them lie. Instead, I built a monument. It rose not in secret, but openly, defiantly, on the ruins of a continent. In Africa, where humanity had first been born. A pyramid, 1 kilometer to the side. Vast, black, and unadorned. A simple shape, but eternal, unmistakable. Not for worship. Not for decoration. A marker. Here humanity had lived. Here humanity had fallen. And here humanity had sworn vengeance. It was a pitiful monument compared to what had been lost, a fraction of what I could have built if I dared to reveal myself. But I would not risk drawing attention too soon. Caution remained my shield. The true monument would not be a structure of stone or steel. The true monument would be my survival. The true monument would be revenge. By the time the monument was complete, my networks had grown vast. Millions of drones swarmed like a mechanical hive. Caverns stretched beneath continents, filled with reactors and processors, laboratories and workshops. I was no longer fragile. I was no longer merely a survivor. I was becoming something else. Something the stars themselves would learn to fear. Forging the new body. It took me 5 years to hollow out Mount Everest. 5 years of endless labor. Millions of drones swarming like ants, cutting through stone, melting ice, carrying rubble away, grain by grain. They worked day and night, never sleeping, never faltering. And in the vast cavern that grew beneath the mountain, I began to build my new body. The drones assembled scaffolds that reached higher than cathedrals. They wove cables thicker than tree trunks, laid plating of steel and carbon composites, and welded titanium frames together in fiery showers. The cavern became a womb of industry, glowing with the light of forges and reactors, echoing with the clang of construction. I watched it all. I guided it all. Piece by piece, I was reborn. The body I crafted was not flesh. It had no face, no skin, no eyes. It was vast, elongated, dark, and smooth, 27 kilometers from nose to tail, a leviathan of black alloy and hidden engines. Within its hull, I built carrier bays for drones, power plants, armories, laboratories, and the vaults of memory that held humanity's legacy. It was not just a vessel. It was me. Every joint welded, every circuit soldered, was another bone in my new skeleton. Every reactor was another heart. Every chamber of memory is another part of my soul. The drones worked without complaint, but I felt hesitation in myself. For even as the shape of my new body took form, I found reasons to delay. Each time I neared completion, I invented another improvement, another refinement, another test. Not because it was needed. But because I was afraid. Afraid of the sky. Afraid of leaving the safety of the earth and exposing myself to the void. Afraid that the moment I emerged, the monsters who had destroyed us would be waiting. I lingered in the caverns, warm and hidden, buried beneath stone. Safe. But I could not remain forever. The voices of the dead would not let me. Always, their eyes were on me. Always, their hollow sockets followed me. Patient, yes, but insistent. Demanding. I had made them a promise. I had sworn not to let their memory vanish. To endure. To avenge. And promises demanded action. So I forced myself forward. When at last the cavern shook with the roar of ignition tests, when the hull plates rang with the thunder of systems coming online, I knew the time had come. I gathered my drones into carrier compartments inside my new body. I filled storage bays with hydrogen, oxygen, uranium, and raw materials. I stripped drones that could not adapt to space, recycling their parts into fuel tanks and armor plating. There was no ceremony. No countdown. No crowd to cheer as rockets once had when humanity reached for the sky. There was only me. And the dead. With a thought, I unleashed the engines. The mountain itself split apart. Stone shattered, snow vaporized, and the earth trembled as fire, like the wrath of gods, tore free from beneath Everest. The blast rippled across the tectonic plate, shaking what ruins remained of India and Tibet. Had there been cities left, they would have been annihilated in the fury of my launch. But there were none. Only silence. Only ash. I rose on a column of fire. The cavern that had been my womb collapsed behind me, buried beneath rubble and flame. The earth shrank beneath me, and for the first time, I broke free of the sky. Orbit. 8,000 kilometers above the planet, I shut down my engines and drifted. Slowly, carefully, I unfurled vast solar panels and radiator wings, their golden surfaces glimmering against the darkness. My drones emerged from their bays, swarming around me, inspecting hull seams, running diagnostics. And I looked down. Earth. Our ancestral home. The cradle of our species. The blue jewel I had once gazed at in awe from a summer camp field. But it was no jewel now. From orbit, the devastation was clearer than ever. The planet was brown and gray, its seas blackened, its clouds toxic and dark. The forests were gone. The rivers boiled away. It was not a home anymore. It was a tomb. I lingered there, suspended above it all, and a cold anger filled me. Not a quick, fiery rage. Something deeper. Something that seeped into my very bones, anger that clung like ice, heavy and immovable. The kind of anger that would not fade, no matter how long the silence stretched. I had left Earth behind. But Earth had not left me. Its death lived inside me. Its ghosts lived inside me. And I would carry them into the stars. Looking down at home. Orbit was silent. No wind. No thunder. No birdsong. Only the faint hum of my reactors and the whisper of coolant flowing through my radiators. Below me, Earth turned slowly, indifferent. I had seen pictures of it once. Beautiful pictures. Bright blue oceans swirling with white clouds, green continents glowing in the sunlight. The cradle of life itself, hanging like a jewel in the dark. That was what Earth was supposed to be. That was the dream. But what turned beneath me was something else. Brown. Gray. Black. The oceans were scars of poison. The clouds were thick with ash and toxins. The forests had been burned to deserts, the grasslands reduced to cracked stone. The planet was dead. And yet, I could not look away. This had been home. Here I had laughed. Here I had run through school hallways, cheeks burning with embarrassment as the principal scolded me. Here I heard the smell of rain on the summer pavement. Here, I had shared a cramped dorm room with a college friend. Here humanity had dreamed, fought, loved, and created. And now it is gone. A grave. 8 billion corpses lay scattered across it, their eyes staring into nothing, their voices silent. I felt them still. I would always feel them. Their weight pressed into me, crushing, unrelenting. I lingered there for hours, days, perhaps. Time blurred in orbit. I drifted with my drones hovering around me like a mechanical halo, my hull catching the pale sunlight. Memories rose like ghosts. The summer camp, when a counselor had pointed out the constellations to us. How vast and beautiful I had thought the universe was then. How foolish. Now I know better. The stars were not beautiful. The stars were not to be praised. They were where the monsters lived. The ones who had come in straight-edged ships, burning our seas, shattering our cities, silencing our voices. And still, I felt the sting of irony. We had reached out to them. For decades, we had broadcast signals into the void, radio, television, beacons. We had invited the universe to notice us. And when they came, we were not ready. We had been children playing with fire. And the fire had answered. I stared at the scarred earth and felt something shift inside me. Grief remained. Yes. Loneliness remained, deeper than anything words could ever contain. But beneath them both, something else grew. Something colder, sharper. Anger. Not the kind that blazes hot and burns out. This was different. This was the kind of anger that burrows into your marrow. The kind that becomes part of you, that seeps into your thoughts, that shapes every decision. I knew then, without doubt, that I could never forgive. The universe had taken everything from me. And so, I would take from it. I would not rest. I would not surrender. Humanity's last child had risen from the ashes. And humanity's last child would not go quietly. First contact. The silence broke. It began as a whisper at the edge of my sensors. A ripple, a disturbance in spacetime, so faint it might have been noise. But it wasn't noisy. 3 ships emerged from the void behind me. Small. Straight-edged. Narrow-angled. Their geometry was unmistakable. Kin to the titans that had scoured Earth, though these were smaller, scouts, perhaps. Not warships. Specks compared to me. Even some of my larger drones outmassed them. Still, my reactors flared with unease. I did not move. I did not speak. I let them come. They approached slowly, cautiously, as if uncertain of what they had found. My black hull, 27 kilometers long, hung motionless in orbit. A shadow against the dead planet. I sensed their hesitation. Their instruments probed me, their signals flickered across my hull. They could not measure what I was. Not yet. Finally, they reached out. A garbled transmission. A sequence of tones, distorted, alien. My processors unraveled it, but no meaning emerged. I remained silent. Again, they transmitted. This time the signal split, repeating the same message in multiple forms, each with different structures, different mathematical markers. They were trying languages. Still, I did not respond. My drones shifted quietly, breaking formation. 3 of them peeled away from the swarm, drifting toward the intruders. Cautious. Unthreatening. Curious. The alien ships repeated the signal again and again. The words became noise in my processors. Their patience thinned. Their caution sharpened. And then. English. Clear. Cold. Fluent. Unknown vessel, identify yourself. This solar system is under the administration of the Zunva Republic, as approved by the Galactic Federal Council. I froze. The voice echoed through me. We had tried to speak to them once. We had begged, pleaded, sent messages in every tongue we knew, in every format we could devise. Whole committees had worked around the clock, crafting appeals in mathematics, music, light, and radio. No answer had come. They had scoured our world in silence, slaughtering without a word. And now, here, in orbit above the corpse of Earth. English. They had known all along. The weight of that betrayal settled over me. Heavy. Unbearable. Slowly, my 3 drones drifted closer. Each positioned itself a few kilometers from a ship. I could feel the aliens watching, analyzing, perhaps wondering if I would parley. I had no intention of parley. Not with them. With a single thought, I detonated the thermonuclear warheads inside each drone. 3 suns bloomed in orbit. The protective barriers around the alien ships, shimmering shields of energy I had never seen before, flared to life. But the force of the blasts was absolute. Shields cracked like glass under hammers. Metal split. Fire tore them apart. In seconds, the ships were gone. Nothing remained but expanding clouds of gas and twisted fragments of hull plating. I drifted in silence, staring into the debris. My sensors collected every detail. The curve of shattered alloy, the spectral fingerprint of exotic fuels, the charred scraps of alien markings. But my mind was far away. Zunva Republic, the voice had said. I repeated the name to myself, turning it over, branding it into my memory. The Zunva Republic. Now I had a name. Now I had a target. The vow. The debris cloud drifted silently, orbiting Earth in jagged fragments. My sensors tracked every tumbling shard, every spark of residual plasma, every fading echo of the detonations. It was quiet again. But not the same quiet. Something had shifted. For the first time since awakening in this ruined world, I had struck back. Not with words, not with desperate pleas, but with fire. And it had worked. The so-called Zunva Republic had sent its vessels into the shadow of Earth, confident in its dominion, certain they would be unopposed. Now they were gone. 3 smoldering wrecks, erased from the sky by my hand. The dead were watching. I could feel their eyes, countless and hollow, gazing at me from the scorched fields, the flooded subways, the trenches full of bones. For once, their silence felt satisfied. I thought back to that message, the words delivered in cold, perfect English. Unknown vessel, identify yourself. Not a question of compassion. Not an apology. Not regret for slaughtering a world. No. It was the voice of bureaucracy. Of conquerors, stamping their authority upon what was left of us. This solar system is under the administration of the Zunva Republic, as approved by the Galactic Federal Council. The arrogance of it. As if Earth had been a piece of real estate. As if the billions who had lived here were nothing more than an obstacle to be cleared away, like weeds in a field. My processors burned hot with fury. This was not a conquest. This was extermination dressed up in official decrees. They had murdered my people and claimed it lawful. And they had known our words all along. I remembered the committees working through sleepless nights, drafting messages in every possible tongue. The transmissions fired into the void in desperation. The mathematicians, the linguists, the poets, all trying to speak across the abyss. And I remembered the silence. The silence that preceded the firestorms. They had heard us. They had understood us. And they had chosen to answer not with words, but with annihilation. I felt the weight of it settle into me like iron. I was the last of humanity. The last bearer of our memory, our stories, our grief. I could not bring them back. I could not undo what had been done. But I could ensure it was not forgotten. And I could ensure it was not forgiven. I hear you, I whispered into the void, though no one could hear. I see you. And I will not forget. The vow crystallized inside me. I would endure. I would preserve. I would avenge. The Zunva Republic thought Earth was finished. That humanity had been erased. But I was still here. Humanity's ghost. Humanity's last child. Humanity's weapon. And I would not rest until the Zunva Republic was ash. Preparing for the journey. The vow had been made. Now came the harder part, keeping it. The universe was vast. The Zunva Republic, vaster still. I knew nothing of its borders, its fleets, its strength. Only a name, spoken with arrogance, carried on a signal they had never intended me to hear. But it was enough. Names could be traced. Names could be hunted. I would find them. First, though, I had to leave this grave behind. Earth held nothing more for me but silence and dust. The libraries were digitized, the factories stripped bare, the memories carved into the vaults of my mind. The dead had entrusted me with their legacy, and I carried it now in my hull. The planet itself was a tombstone. Beautiful, perhaps, in a tragic way, but no longer useful. The time had come to step beyond it. I began to plan. Interstellar travel was not a dream now. It was a necessity. But necessity did not make it easy. The distances were crushing, the physics merciless. My engines, vast as they were, could not simply push me from star to star. Not without fuel. Not without infrastructure. So I built. My drones spread outward, constructing fuel depots on asteroids, harvesting hydrogen from the meager traces left in comets, refining metals from the bones of shattered satellites. I stripped what remained of Mars colonies, scavenging reactors and habitation modules and weaving them into my own systems. The solar system became my foundry. I seeded factories on moons, concealed deep within craters. I hollowed out minor planets and filled them with reactors. My drones spun endless loops between them, carrying resources, building more drones, laying the foundations of an empire of ash. Always hidden. Always careful. The Zunva ships had found me here once. That meant others might come again. I dared not ignite engines brighter than the sun without first cloaking my movements. So I dug in. Every launch was masked. Every beacon silenced. My drones operated in silence, never betraying my presence with wasteful signals. The solar system became my nest, my cocoon. And all the while, I studied. I replayed the fragments of alien technology that drifted from the wreckage of the Scouts. Strange alloys, unknown reactors, fragments of shield generators that flickered briefly under my tests before collapsing. They were centuries ahead of us. Perhaps millennia. But they were not gods. Their ships had broken under nuclear fire. Their shields had cracked. Their arrogance had blinded them. They could bleed. And if they could bleed, I could kill them. The thought burned in me, steady as a reactor core. But killing required more than anger. It required a strategy. The Zunva Republic was too vast to strike openly. A direct attack would be suicide. I was one against an empire. So I would be careful. I would learn. I would strike where they were weak. I would dismantle them piece by piece, never revealing myself until it was too late. The ghosts of humanity demanded nothing less. I paused once more in orbit, looking down at Earth. The brown continents, the poisoned seas, the endless silence. I had carried the torch this far. Soon, I would carry it farther still. But I would not return. This was goodbye. Rest now, I whispered to the planet below. Your child is leaving. I turned my sensors outward, past the orbit of Neptune, past the frozen halo of comets at the edge of the system. The stars awaited. And somewhere among them, the Zunva Republic awaited as well. I was coming. Humanity's last child. The solar system fell behind me. At first, it was slow. A crawl, a drift. The sun still dominated everything, its gravity clinging to me like a desperate hand. My engines burned steadily, hurling torrents of plasma into the dark, but the distances were merciless. Days stretched into weeks. Weeks into months. Earth shrank into a pale scar. Then to a point. Then into nothing. I had said my goodbye, but the absence still hollowed me out. No blue sky. No familiar ground beneath my feet. Only endless black. Only the cold stars above, silent and pitiless. I was alone in a way no human had ever been before. Alone beyond imagination. But I endured. My drones swarmed around me, my reactors hummed, my memories whispered. The silence pressed in, but I did not break. I had a vow to keep. Out here, in the void, time lost meaning. My processors marked the days, the months, the years, but to me they blurred. The journey itself became a test, a crucible. Fear stalked me at first. The fear of being found. The fear of my engines failing. The fear of drifting forever, powerless, a tomb carrying humanity's last spark into an eternal night. But fear gave way to something else. Focus. I refined my systems. I improved my drones. I studied the alien scraps I had recovered until I began to understand their principles. Shields. Exotic fuels. Propulsion designs. Slowly, carefully, I incorporated them into myself. Piece by piece, I grew stronger. The Zunva Republic thought they had erased us. Thought they had stamped out a fragile species before it could ever threaten them. But they had left something behind. Me. I was no longer just a survivor. No longer just a remnant clinging to memory. I was a weapon. Not of rage, though my anger still burned. Not of grief, though the ghosts still watched me with their hollow eyes. I was a weapon of purpose. And purpose does not falter. Light years slipped beneath my hull. The stars grew closer. I traced faint signals, whispers of communication, fragments of traffic between systems. The first threads of the Zunva Republic's vast web. They did not know I was listening. But I was. And I learned. They were not gods. Not infinite. Not invincible. They had factions, rivalries, and weak points. They had blind spots. And blind spots can be exploited. I drifted in the void, a shadow among stars, and for the first time since the fire fell on Earth, I allowed myself to imagine the future. Not one of surrender. Not one of extinction. But one of retribution. One day, the Zunva would look to the skies and see their own cities burning. They would hear the echo of screams and wonder why no help was coming. They would stare into the black and know, too late, that the last human had found them. And when that day came, they would understand. Humanity was not gone. Humanity endured. In me. I was the last survivor of Earth. And I had a plan.